Hello, friends. I'm Joseph, and this is Almost Sound. We started Almost Sound and its podcast series with one main intention: to help artists, promoters, record label owners, playlist curators, and others in the music industry share their message and views with the world. We hope that you will get inspired by their stories, experiences, and work, and that by spending time with them at home, you will also get to know them as people. Without further ado, let's welcome today's guest. Sophia Saze is an artist, performer, musician, producer, DJ, and label owner of Dusk and Haze. Born in Georgia and having grown up in the US, her sonic DNA has been shaped by a wide range of experiences and cultures. Sophia started venturing in the field with trip hop and house, and eventually landed on planet techno. She now continues to craft her own particular style of production, often centered around field recordings, and over the years, she's been releasing music for Francis Harris Kingdoms and her own Dusk and Haze. In this chat, we talk about Sophia's journey, where commitment has been a constant factor throughout her studies and jobs thereafter, and we also learn about an unusual job offer by the Central Intelligence Agency of US. The artist talks about the challenges of leaving a secure job to focus on music and how one might overcome self-doubts and outside pressure. We also chat about Dusk and Haze from before it became a label in 2017 to its new plans, including supporting emerging producers with access to tools and resources. And while Sophia shares about her creative process in writing her album Self, we are reminded that music fundamentally feels special when it comes from the heart. Enjoy this chat with Sophia Saze. Sophia, thanks so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time.
Amazing. And let me start with a question for people who don't know you yet. Like, for someone who just meets you maybe at a cocktail party and they ask you, "What do you do?" How would you reply?
Well, I think recently one of my friends was saying he had read a post or something about something that I had done, and the way it was titled was the order. It was artist, musician, producer, DJ last, and I really felt I kind of identified with that order really nicely. But I guess artist being the most interchangeable term,
Yeah.
But certainly I feel definitely more as a producer first, and then DJing last, or performer last, I guess.
Yeah. And you think about yourself as a producer, and did you start by making music and then you eventually in time, you eventually then started DJing after producing, or they kind of came at the same time?
I started producing first. Well, when I was young, I kind of was dabbling in more composition, I guess, but very free form. I didn't really, I had a musical background, but not very advanced theory, I guess. So I kind of just started putting things together. I would just get sheet music and just try to compose, and then after I started to get into electronic music, I started producing first. But I was kind of circling around a lot of different forms of electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I made the decision to actually have a career from it, it was interesting because then I actually started DJing first, and then
Wow.
Yes. But yeah, I used to put out a lot of different aliases, I guess. I did house, and I did it's trip hop alias. I was just kind of experimenting. Yeah. And then I was experimenting with DJing, I guess. So
Yeah.
But I always enjoyed performance. I was a dancer when I was younger too. So I always liked the idea of presenting something, but it was kind of the last thing,
Yeah. And then in a way, so okay, you were a dancer for some time in your life as well, and you were into different genres. Was there a specific order that you got into, let's say, house, electronica, techno, or they were kind of all together and then you focus on one thing?
Yes. I think I've always been a bit of a gypsy in that sense, just across anything I do, from cooking through dancing or music, just always bouncing around different stylistic ranges. But within production, I started out primarily in trip hop. I mean,
No.
as in terms of what I was actually producing, because I felt it had like, it just it allowed me like freedom to kind of like express myself, and it was like more down tempo, so it was easier to kind of, you know, grasp. And then my first like stab at electronic music was house, because it was like the most like pungent and like obvious, like kind of like, you know, just I'm so excited to be making this, and just like you know, just going for it. And techno was the last thing actually, because for me techno music has always been more like cerebral and something that you kind of like it's like you work your taste up to, you know, so it's not like it's not very easily consuming.
Yeah. It's less for mass consumption than house or trip hop is also quite niche. I mean, like there's a lot of people who listen to trip hop, but it's not like a mass genre.
It was, so there was something about trip hop that like, I guess it was just like it allowed me like from a production standpoint to combine a lot of like my tastes, you know, in a very gentle way, I guess. But yeah, here I am now doing techno.
Now, nice. And one thing that I'm interested in is like trying to connect the dots of your path until here is so you've traveled a lot in your life. You were born in Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, and you have lived in different countries, and eventually now you are in US. How does that connect, like overlaps in terms of timeline with your music taste and the development of your taste in music?
Yeah, I think it's like one of the same. It's probably why I would say that I am such like a very uncommitted or like dedicated to one style. Because you know, like as a child, I feel like, you know, it just like we all like have this like inner child, and it's just like our adulthood is just like an extension of that. So you kind of just whatever happens in your formative years, it's long lasting, right? So
yeah,
I feel for me, like having moved around was really every place that I lived in, I picked up a different sort of, you know, foundation for like what my music taste would become eventually. So like Georgia for me, like definitely like the most deeply rooted theme, I guess, in most of my music is nostalgia, and I feel like that definitely stems from Georgia. And you know, I think also because Georgians are like, we really pride ourselves on our culture and like our heritage, and it's a very, you know, it's a very ancient culture, so the music is like very reflective of that. The folk music we have, like, you know, I'm sure you've heard it, like the polyphonic singing, and like we have a lot of like very unique instruments to the area, and the sound like traditional folk music in Georgia is very it's very nostalgic, you know, it's very patriotic, and it's really powerful. And I think me having separated from Georgia from like an early age was definitely like that's like where that developed, that sort of like nostalgic attachment, and like not being home, you know, and missing it because I was like torn away from my country at 5, you know. And so and then every place was like was definitely a different thing. You know, Philadelphia for me was kind of like the most because my parents still live here, and I'm actually back here now. Philly was like a very interesting place because it was like the closest thing that I could have to like regaining a sense of home, you know.
Right.
And definitely like the hip hop culture here had a really big impact on me, you know, when I was growing up. There's also like a lot of really cool niche, like, you know, kind of cult scenes here, like within the jazz scene here. There's a lot of like really interesting, you know, venues, and so Philly was important. And then yeah, I guess New York City was like brutally beautiful. Like it was just like a self-destructive kind of like 8 years of just like, you know, I guess to answer your question, every place, you know, you pick up a different element, and then eventually you can't commit to one thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And then
Like
eventually, Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, and then you become you, and then I mean, whatever happens in the past, it's part of you now, eventually.
Yeah, it definitely becomes like ingrained in your DNA, and your sonic DNA, I guess. And it's weird. Like I was even, and you know, as you're like kind of in your creative process of like production, you know, you definitely hit like different points, right? And you're constantly like evolving your craft. But like, you know, for me being in lockdown, the most like breakthrough thing was like, I'm gonna try to form like sort of put more of a template to my work so that I become more efficient, you know. So like not like a lot of like these like inefficient processes, like, you know, just simple things like organizing your sample library or organizing your projects, or, you know, or like I was thinking like most of the time I waste is in like automation, you know. And I'm like, sitting there like, okay, how can I, kind of create a template around this so I don't waste time going forward. And so like, I guess what I'm saying is like, even that, like, even now trying to like put more of a construct around myself, it's still challenging because I was like
Of
working on
course.
stuff yesterday and I'm like still deviating, it's like
Yeah.
it's always like a challenge, I guess
Yeah.
it never ends. Forever.
Of course, and I guess like the other interesting thing is that being in doing a creative activity like one of the artists or the producer, it's good to deviate from the structure. So having a structure that in a way allows you to be free and not spend energy and time in having to set up your live set and everything. But then deviating is what makes it, you have this kind of happy moment, happy experiments, happy accidents, and you create stuff that is not. It doesn't sound like computer music. It's more like your humanized way to interpret music.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. A very, very strong one, actually. I think, because I think if somebody had told me, like, early on, like, what recommendation or whatever, it's like, I actually think you do have to definitely be free form, like at least in the first, like, I don't know, I guess the shelf life is different for everyone. For me, it was like, I would say like 10 years of production that like, until I was finally like, okay, I want to start like putting more strategy around these mistakes, not strategy, but like you said, you learn so many techniques, you just, and that's how, for me at least, that was the bulk of how I learned to produce.
Yes. Yeah. And in terms of your studio process, now that you've kind of come to a certain level, meaning that you have experience with that, is there any, I'm interested in two things. One is the normal process, so how you approach music production, and the other one is that when you face creative blocks, which I presume that like you must be facing sometimes, how do you tackle them? Do you have a process to say, I'm just gonna crush it, or maybe wait?
So this is probably like my like all-time favorite subject, like the creative process, right? And I feel like it's like this infinite kind of like plethora of like Pandora's box, and there's so much in there, and you're constantly like I guess like you're constantly pushing different peaks, right? So I would say like my studio process has really changed, like, and it continues to change, and I think adapting is really important. For example, I was just back home in Georgia for 2 months. I got like locked in there because there were no flights back to the States. I didn't have speakers, I didn't have I had like this, I had lost my like headphones even, so I only had like buds. So, and I was in the process of finishing a record, and so I started mixing like visually instead of like trusting my ears as much. Well, still obviously I had like the output from like my computer monitor, but like I guess like mixing to that, and then just like kind of trusting, like just gauging like a different mixing process than what I was used to,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because like those kind of limits, like, yeah, you end up adapting to the situation, and that's kind of
So
how
true.
you evolve, and I guess like the challenging thing, yeah, interchangeable with what I just said, I guess, it's like you're constantly hitting different challenges, and like I think like every day I'm like YouTubing some other thing about Logic that I didn't know, and but I guess like the biggest challenge for me is just committing to things, like I tend to like just delay like finishing tracks in the sense of like it's all fleshed out, but just have like hard drives and hard drives of just like fleshed out tracks, but I'm not confident in like committing to finalizing
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Just that like final thread, but that I guess also takes time to like build the confidence to say like this is over.
For sure. Yes. This seems to be like one of the hardest and toughest challenges for producers. And do you think for yourself, like, do you think is a matter of maybe not being as confident in finishing it, or there is something else around procrastination that you're like, okay, no, I've done my part, like let's do it another day?
I think it's just like psychology, and I think it's like I think like demanding an artist to muster confidence in any capacity is like kind of like traumatizing a child. Like, it's like you can't force it in the sense, like, because it's like
Yeah.
that there's so much inner work that it's like it's not just like a shyness, or it's not something that's like I'm lazy, or I think it's just it's just like you becoming confident and like embracing what you're
Yeah,
doing, right? And that takes a lot more work than the amount of years that you put into production, like developing as a person, you know.
for sure.
And
Yes.
yeah, I always feel like that's like a really big thing with like, you know, artist development, I guess, and that whole like process of, you know, starting to release your tracks is like just being ready for that mentally, you know,
Yeah.
and like the more grounded you are within yourself. Because at the end of the day, like, you know, like me finally, you know, embracing my work wasn't the result of being like, oh, you know, I've done this in XYZ years in music. It was just like, all right, I don't care anymore, you know. It's just like I'm just gonna do what feels right for me.
Yes.
And yeah, and I know a lot of artists who like don't producers who don't listen to other people's music for that reason, right? So just not get influenced.
Jeff
Uh,
Mills.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, and it's definitely a method, you know.
Yes. Of course. Yeah. And I think it's a very common challenge, the one of like not finishing music to, or let's say being challenged with having to finish music and pushing yourself toward like to find this confidence and say, okay, I'm gonna finish this track, send it out, and see what happens. In one of the things that I've come to think about that is that one potential solution for some people is to find an external support network, or like a feedback circle, where even when you are not exactly confident that thing is going to work or reflects like your ability, you can send it to other people who might advise you on whether you should finish it or not, and if you finish it, how you can shape it better. And it's super funny that I spoke with Lag a few days ago, and he was saying that one of his most famous tracks called Controlla, he hated that and he didn't want to release it. But Buzz Moy from Mord, who talked him into releasing the track, and he was like, no, I don't want to release it. Sucks, like it
Yeah,
just doesn't sound. And then it ended up being a very, very happy accident in a way. Like it ended up being a very, very interesting track that brought a lot of attention to his music as well. So positive outcome out of that. Interesting.
yeah. No, absolutely. I like reference point, right? And like having like a stable reference point, and having, you know, not within that network of your trusted, you know, reviewers, people that have seen the whole process from start to finish. So like your friends that have been there from the start to see
Yeah.
what, because like that's the truest reference point, right? There has to be a starting point as well, because you know somebody just walking into your career when you've just made like your big, let's say your biggest like track, you know, it's like if that's your starting point of a reference, it's kind of
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
like it's funny because like my mom is kind of like my reference point,
Yeah.
because I mean, first of all, she was a musician, or she played piano herself her whole life, and like,
That's so cool.
but more importantly, you know, while she had like no context of like techno, now she's like fully like she has a SoundCloud where she follows like every techno DJ, and she'll be like,
Love
oh,
it.
you know, check out this person's latest like release, or like and she's like so tuned in. And you know what it is? It's that she can like it's not about like the stylistic thing, you know, of whether she likes it or not. For her, it's like she just kind of calls me out if she feels like I'm doing something that is not true to me, you know, and
Wow.
why she kind of makes me question why I'm making that what I am, you know.
Yeah.
And then equally gives me confidence, you know, when I'm not able to grasp something.
Yes. It's beautiful. I think you are lucky, in a lucky position to have that relationship with your mother. That's like it's supporting you, coaching you in a way, like pushing you
Totally.
to. It's amazing. And did he always enjoy electronic music? Did she always enjoy electronic music, or it
She
came
had
because of
no
you? No.
she had no idea. She had like absolutely no idea. And I mean, to this
Wow.
day, she's like terrified by it in some levels, because you know it's like for her it's like this like uncharted like unknown territory. But sonically, she's you know she started to get into it. I guess like what I meant was like the sort of like the actual like raving aspect of it. But but she really didn't know anything about electronic music. And yeah, it just like it's weird. Like, you know, sometimes there are things that, you know, I feel like like you said, that I won't like, or that I would think she would like, you know. I was just interested in learning how to make like acid core the other day, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go for it. And she'll like her choices and like what she picks is like it's incredible, you know, because it's like when I reflect on it, I'm like, it's always spot on. Like whatever the style is, it's just like she's just like she just knows when something is like my sound and why, like if I'm doing it with the right motive.
Wow.
The message, I guess.
That's very interesting. Yes. And so it makes me think that you have like your parents, or at least your mother, have been and are supportive with you. Like, do you feel that they have supported you also in trusting more that you could make it in your music career?
Well, I think no parent can fully trust that, you know, like naturally a parent wants the best for their child, or most cases at least. But I think my parents, yeah, it was definitely just more like fear, like naturally when I left my day job to just like go from like income to no income at first, you know, and just, but I think that they have always like known that I work really hard in anything that I commit to, and that I'm like very dedicated to like piercing through my craft.
Yes.
And you know, obviously when it doesn't reap any benefits for a few years, it's scary. So it's been a challenge. The whole process is very challenging. And whether that challenge is with your parents or within yourself, I think it's the same thing. You know, it's just like kind of like trusting yourself, most importantly, that you're just gonna you're gonna you're gonna become really good at what you're doing, you know. So it was a tough process, but I think that we're in a much better place than where we started.
Of course. Do you think I mean, it certainly happened gradually, like I imagine it happened like over a period of time, but do you think there was a specific event, perhaps a release of yours or a gig you played, where they actually were like, this is real, Sophia's really doing this?
You know, funnily enough, like as much as my parents are like proud of whatever accomplishments or like, I don't think it ever ends really. You never really have this like breakthrough moment, you know. It's like, it's weird because like my first release from when I started like actually like putting music out again with like this alias Sophia Saze, because Saze is not my last name, and it was like they like the first like song, I guess it was like it just went viral, like it just like started doing really well, like whatever, it was not totally unexpected. And like as a producer, you think that that's like the thing you're trying to achieve, right? Like get a lot of people to like something you make, and you know that but it's like it's not in the wider schemes, like it's just never ends, like you're constantly having these kind of like, so I don't think so. And I think people will always doubt you, and you just can't rely on like self-validation like that. You can't expect that anything is going to validate your confidence, you know, and just feeling like, okay, I've done it. And I don't think it should, because you should always evolve, you know. I think if you at any point, like I think it was like Hendrix, or like this term, it was like, you know, artists always have to stay hungry, you know. The minute you lose your hunger, it's like, you know, so I feel like the minute you're like, okay, I've made it, it's like, where do you go from there creatively, right?
Of course, yeah. And there was I think applies for the broader creator bucket, so artists but also creators, like, and I fit in the bucket also entrepreneurs, people who are building a business or a solution for some kind of problem. And I remember there was I think I watched like YouTube video where someone was talking about meeting with Elon Musk, where Elon Musk was giving for people who don't know him, is one of the, let's say, most interesting entrepreneurs, a bit of a crazy guy and a character, and he was giving a speech to some entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and one of them asked him, Elon, what would you tell to someone who wants to be an entrepreneur and is to motivate them? And he said, look, if you're looking for motivation, it's already a good reason, a good signal for you to stop, because nobody's gonna have to motivate you. Yeah. And I think it's true.
True. Now he's like interested in techno, right? Or something. I saw it's like recent. I don't know. He had like tweeted something like, I could like use a rave or something.
Basically, he's building. He has this company called Tesla, for people who don't know, who produces electric cars, and is creating solar battery plants. And the next one is in Berlin. And he said, I think we should throw a party in the solar station in Berlin.
I mean, to be fair, I would rather that there's like, I don't know, a party like in outer space right now than like in a lot of venues that I'm seeing a lot of like maskless events and things like that. So it's probably safer right now.
Yeah. Who knows? And so one other question that I wanted to ask you about your, let's talk about your path. So before doing music, you did a bunch of other jobs. If I'm not mistaken, you were working for Citibank.
And I read an interview, you got an offer from CIA or CIA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So tell us briefly, like, what's your career path before music?
Yeah. So I was born in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the capital. And at the time, there was like a lot of, political instability in the country. We had just like divorced from the USSR or Soviet Union. I don't know if anybody really calls it that, but yeah, my parents like were basically forced to leave the country, and I moved to the States. And we were back and forth a lot, and because at the time it was like for applicants seeking political asylum, it was kind of difficult to gain that gain like proper documents to stay like legally in the States. And yeah, like we moved around a lot. I lived in Canada, and like in my formative years, like I was raised in a really traditional household, like very Georgian. And my childhood was mainly just like excelling in academics, and then just like coming home, doing like piano classes, dance classes, and then going to sleep and repeat, like no social life whatsoever. Yeah. Right. So I guess that probably influenced my music too, in many ways. So I was really into the arts, but it was never something that was like not just in Georgia, I guess, but parents in general will always kind of like put this focus of like academics and having a real job, I guess. Yeah. Quote unquote. So I think I like coming from like seeing my parents go through the whole immigration process, and like just kind of seeing them struggle and like trying to like regain their life in the States. I always like also had this like pressure of like I've got to get a job, I've got to do really well in school so I can just like get this job. And yeah, I got like a full scholarship to George Washington, and I'd always worked. Like I started working when I was like maybe 14, 16, just like of my own, like like inner need to like help my parents or help myself, kind of like excel in life. And yeah, you just kind of you look at like financial security as like the like emblem of like. And so I got a full scholarship to George Washington University, studying DC, and basically like yeah, I was studying in the business school there. I actually started off studying international affairs at first, then like switched to business when I realized like I had to make money, I guess, at some point. Yeah. And I got offered like a job at Citibank, like working on Wall Street, before I graduated. Wow. But at the same time, like George Washington was a really, I guess like it's a very politically affiliated school because of of the location, and a lot of it's kind of like a feeder university for a lot of government organizations, like CIA, which is like located like just on the outskirts of DC, their headquarters. And yeah, I got offered this, like in that process, they were basically just like seeking out this like very particular like profile. And I guess I matched that profile. And so they have, they basically approach you with an offer, but it's the recruitment process is like any other job, right? Except that they approach you, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And you go through like basically like several rounds, same with like the process I went through. Yeah. Like any job.
For Citibank, yes.
And it was really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it was just this like decision I wanted to make, which was like, do I make money, or do I like, do this thing that I'm really fascinated in? Maybe fast forward now, I would have taken that offer, but at the time, I definitely like looked to like financial security. So yeah, it was a really interesting process. It always makes me wonder about like my friends who I like never heard about later. And I was like, what are they up to now?
Disappeared.
Like, yeah, like there was a few, because they kind of like, yeah, it was a really interesting process. And then I got this job from Citibank, and I moved to New York, and I was just like hustling on Wall Street for like 3 years. Like I absolutely despised my life. Not because, for anyone doing it, I think it's fantastic if you're into it. Yes. My brain is not like mathematically formulated or like that in that kind of corporate structure. So it was really brutal. I would say like it was really destructive for me mentally, because it was just like the weight was so heavy, and I was starting to go out a lot more during that time. And so like I think I started to look at like this idea. I had already started like going out, I guess, in universities, like when I started to really like start producing and like start putting out records. And not putting out records, but I think like just like I think the first record I actually put out was when I moved to New York. And yeah, I started to look at like this kind of like escape, right? Like a lot of people who get into electronic music, it's like this sort of like haven.
Right.
And then after another 3 years, I quit my job and didn't really know what I was going to do in music at all. But you know, I took 6 months to kind of figure it out. I traveled. I came to actually like London.
Wow.
No, first I stopped in Paris to visit some friends. Went to London. Ended up at this like really weird rave somewhere like outside of London. I don't even know, like really looking back at it. Like it was so dodgy. Like I had to like go like meet up with some person so that they could like drive me out. It was just like I didn't know. But I was like, it was so weird. It was like this like calling. I was like, I'm really interested in this, you know. And I think I was just like willing to like whatever happens. I just want to figure out what it is I want to be doing, right? So it's like just go with the ones. Went to London, then I went to Amsterdam for AD, and I think when I went to Amsterdam, it was like really formative for me because I started to see that there was a whole industry around what it was that I wanted to do. And when I think from like when I saw it in an application sense of like, okay, you can actually have like a job doing this, I guess. That's when it really kind of and then I ended up in Berlin, and I think seeing that whole 360, like, okay, this is how this all works. You know, I came back to the States. I sat down with my mom. I remember actually, funnily enough, my longtime manager, my mom. And it was like, you know, like I kind of just like, I was like, okay, this is what I want to be doing, but you know, how am I going to do it? You know, and that just picked the starting point, an alias and a label, and from there.
Got it. And so basically that was, if I'm not mistaken, around 2017 is when you started also Dusk and Haze, the label, right?
Well, actually, like we started out in terms of a label, but we started out in 2015. We were throwing raves at first, like throwing parties, and then started doing then we're doing like warehouse raves too, and then we got shut down really bad ones, like just super bad. Like I almost ended up in jail for it, basically, because it was like I think we had like 1,500 people in a warehouse, you know, and it was just like, you know, there's nothing bad happening. It was just like, you know, we met all the requirements. It's just that the license we didn't get the license. We couldn't. So basically at the time New York City was making it really difficult for underground promoters to get licenses, and it was just really poor timing. So when we got shot, I was like, okay, it's pretty difficult to try to do parties right now. So I had always wanted to do the label. So we started in 2017 as a label. But before we were throwing parties,
And so that you were in Europe, that was when you went to the AD, it was 2014, 2015? Roughly?
Yeah, 2014. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Interesting, okay. And so it's interesting that you kind of took the leap from like a secure job, like the things that like essentially society or you know, parents tell you to do because it's safe, it just looks safe for your good actually. But were you already making enough money on the other, like on music? Or put it another way, no, okay.
Not at all.
Right.
I mean, I had saved some, you know, from my previous job, but you know, just like New York City is not cheap to just live in. So when I, you know, I basically did a lot of jobs in between. You know, I worked at a recording studio. I was like, you know, bartending. I was doing whatever I had to do to pay my bills, right? And I started working for a nightclub, Good Room, in New York City, and I was doing like everything, like in the sense of like whatever job they would give me, I was down for, because I wanted to just learn and also eat.
Yeah, of course. Pay the rent. Not easy, yes. And okay, super interesting. And so was there anything, like you mentioned before, that like the CIA offer, like you wondered whether they would have, for sure that would have taken you somewhere else, but you wonder how your life would have been like. Was there anything that you regret, like that you didn't take, any offer you didn't do just to try of this experience?
No, I think I will say, like, as emotionally attached and like passionate I am about like immediate situations, I'm equally like emotional about detaching, like when I feel, because I feel like instinct and like intuition is so strong, right? Like if there's always a reason for why you do things and why you don't do certain things. And I feel like you just have to trust your judgment, and I don't really tend to look back in that sense, because I mean, maybe it's just a way of like psychologically just coming to terms with things, but like, you know, you kind of just, you know, I just always look back on situations that, you know, I thought that I might regret later in life, walking away from, and I always realize like that like life just kind of like sets things up for you. It's like, it's weird. It's like there's a reason why you didn't take that job, or there's a reason why you like broke up with that person, or whatever it is. It's just like there's always a bigger reason, I guess, and just trusting the process.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like it turned out to be good for you, to be a good choice, like what you did. And I take you're happy with where you are right now, and then you enjoy what you're doing. And you feel the way, you feel like satisfied of your choice and be like confident in saying, I'm going to continue pursuing this route.
Well, I think that you kind of like, what's the term, like put the nail on the, or hammer, I forget the term for that, but like basically you nailed it. Like I feel that like being comfortable with your decisions is like, that's like, it's just so important to not like prematurely, you know, develop, because you just like like, and I feel like the schedule before, where we're all going from gig to gig, and you know, you didn't really have time to digest that, and you just really have to make sure that your inner needs are aligning, right, with like what you're doing. Like, why are you really doing this? Like, are you happy doing this? Like, are you really happy? Like, I mean, not happy in the sense of like, obviously, like, you know, nobody's just like happy all day every day, but just like, just being at peace with yourself, I guess, you know, because, you know, and that's why I think, like, you know, you see these like examples, not just artists, that, you know, they hit like this massive crisis at a certain point, you know, because you just like all these years have flown by, and you're just been like rushing decisions. So I think I've kind of like, you know, I always kind of made sure to prioritize like my motives, you know, first and foremost. And whatever they are, and it's fine, you know, like it's like, if if for example finances are more important for you than artistry, right? Like if this is what, like, if that's, but if you're honest with yourself about that, you know, then that might work for XYZ person, but you know, it might not work for somebody else. Or if you know, if somebody's like, let's say, very family oriented, you know, or they like their home life, you know, and they're constantly gigging and they're touring and they're missing out on that, they're going to be really unhappy, you know, at a certain point. And I don't think we really had time to like question that a lot of the time. But I always kind of like sought that out, I guess.
It's a really interesting topic, and I think this forced stop, a kind of a forced reset of the whole industry, of the whole world, has put everybody in a position where they have to question whatever the choice were, right? And really try to understand, like, am I doing this because I don't know, it's just my way to escape from problems, or am I doing this because I'm really happy doing this, or is this sustainable as well? I think, I don't know, for a lot of artists also, the downside of that was that, like, a lot of artists, including myself, I think, had a bit of a sense of losing themselves or their identity, which is normally associated with going out, gigging, playing, making music for a dance floor that doesn't exist for 6 months. It really makes you question, like, I don't know, am I doing something that is really fulfilling? Like, would I do it if there was no dance floor anymore? Very interesting, deep topic.
Absolutely. And I think, like, in every industry, people are doing that right now, just really questioning themselves. And sadly enough, I feel like, you know, on very poor angles too, right? Like, just like people just being very depressed, you know, just coming, like, facing that mirror and just looking at themselves. But there's also really, like, there's a lot of silver linings in it too. You know, because we can all get like a lot of good from this whole thing right now, you know, and if there is like kind of like this like light at the end of the tunnel in that sense. And I think, I just think, you know, it's ultimately, you're only hurting yourself, right, by not being honest with it. I know it's really funny. It's like the other day I was thinking about this, like when I was doing, like, you know, when I was touring last year, doing all these, like, you know, banging like techno shows, I was making like ambient music, like really very like on like probably the most, like to today at least, one of the most like heartfelt or like records that I've done. And now that there's no shows, I've been making so much dance music, like only dance music.
Kind of the
And I
opposite.
realized, I was like, why was that? Like on a creative level, like why was I, what was my motive? And like, and I realized that actually touring was really depressing me.
Wow.
And it was like, it made me miss home, and it makes sense, right? And now that I'm home, I'm like, I'm so happy, and I'm making like hardcore. And I'm just like, it's like all these like things that I would like didn't really have an interest in doing last year. And I'm just like at home, like just like dancing to myself, just like enjoying it. And I think it's because I'm really happy to be home, and for me that's really important. I've come to like, realize it's best to just face that and not to be honest, when I saw shows coming back, it kind of gave me anxiety in a way, because I was like, I'm not ready. Like 3 months hasn't been enough time to like, go through this like process, because it's a really beautiful time we have right now, to like, it's just like, I don't know, we're so lucky in so many ways. Like
Yes.
it's weird to say that, obviously, because of just what's happening, but like, there's a lot of good, I believe, that can come out of this. And a lot of music that could come out of it. And I just feel like, nope, like I don't want to listen to like sad ambient music right now. I want to feel like life is sad enough. I feel that like there's been this like argument lately, like when I talk to like my other like producer friends of like, what are you making? Like this is what I'm up to, and everybody's like, nah, I'm not making dance music right now. And I feel like kind of like, the odd sheep, like, just like, all right, well, like I'm making like 170 plus, or something, like, it's like, and it's so weird. And yeah,
it's beautiful. It's counterintuitive because like, you might expect that if you're gigging a lot, you want to make tools to gig or to play. And then if you're home sitting, you want to make something for home listening. But I think in your case, it's like, you see that as something that maybe, I don't know, the music, it's really connected with what you feel inside. And maybe you're feeling that you miss home when you're touring, so you want to make more calm music. And when you're at home, you want to make more dancey music, because that's the thing that is not present in your life right now. Super interesting.
Yeah. And equally, I would say, not like in any way of like dismantling somebody else's like work, but it's like, in a way, it makes me wonder, like, sure, you can say that like, touring was inspiring you to make dance records, but also like, if you really love making dance music, right, why would like it wouldn't sway, it wouldn't change, right? Like I feel like that, so it makes me like question a lot of the motives of people that make music like kind of on according to trend, right, or according to what's happening. So I actually realized I love making dance music, like this is great. It's been like it's been, but touring wasn't allowing me to do that as much.
Yeah, because you have less time, and I guess like, your mind is in a different headspace. But super interesting. Yes, and couple of questions around the label, and which are, so okay, you started as an event platform, you were touring event and raves around 2015. Then eventually the label becomes a label, and you released an album last year, June last year. And yes, I was wondering, okay, so you made your first album and released it in June 2019. How was the process for you? Like, did you enjoy sitting down in the studio and thinking about the album? And for someone who is approaching their first album, like, what would you recommend they think about, they do before starting, or when they start?
Yeah, it was insane, that whole experience, because first of all, Francis Harris, I had like really, he had been like an idol of mine as a producer for a really long time, like from the start, I would say. And it was already like very admirable. It was very like kind of I felt really grateful that he approached me to ask to write a record, right? So that was already from the start. The starting point was like really honest, because I was like, this is amazing that like, that it feels so fitting. And then I always feel like records have to embody what you're going through on a personalistic, like my art imitates my life, right? Like it's like, that's the it's always like on the same track. So at that time, like I said, I was starting to like tour more, and as a result, I was like becoming more introspective of what was happening, and realizing that there was a lot of things like at the core that I was not facing, and I just kind of from the time that he asked me to the time that I actually sat down to write it, it was like maybe almost a year, I'd say. And I purposely did that, I guess, because I just didn't, I didn't necessarily know how to communicate what it was I was trying to say. And one weekend, I just like, yeah, I just sat down, and I think I was probably like in a very emotional state as was, and like, I just didn't sleep for like a few days, and I just like, I just did this like basically this huge sketch, like one long Logic project, and just a lot of it was just like live jamming and just like letting it flow. And it was just like this insane cathartic experience. I don't know how to like really, it was so bizarre. Like at the end of it, I remember I just like, when I finished it and I played it back, and I called my mom and I was crying on the phone. I was literally crying. And I was like, I had remembered there was a Japanese DJ that I had met in Tokyo, and right before the show, he was the headliner, and I was just the supporting talent. And I was talking to him, and he was just talking about like how powerful making music is for him, and how it was really a heartfelt conversation. And he did this like pop up in New York. I saw him again, and basically like, the idea was, he said, he started crying, and he was just like, making music is like the most beautiful thing for me, and it's just the most like intimate connection. And I was on the phone with my mom, and I was telling her, I was like, I think I understand what he means now. I was like, I just did this thing, and it was probably the most like powerful feeling I've had from creating something.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so reflective. It was just it just totally being able to voice yourself musically, to communicate what it is you're trying to say, like putting notes to it. It's just like an insane feeling, right? And I think like basically I finished that record, and I was just like kind of mind blown. But not like in this, I'm never usually like that with my work, because I'm always critical track to track. I think writing an album is really different. It's a totally different experience, and it just has to come to you. You cannot like come to it, I guess.
Yeah.
And then once I had, kind of, it's weird. Sometimes like we don't really know why like the creative intent, like even if it was very intimate. There was like a lot of like, personal like field recordings and all these things that were in the jam, but like, because like life was so fast, sometimes like going from gig to gig, you don't really have time to digest. Like it might be happening, but you don't really understand the concept, necessarily. So you don't start writing a track and you're like, this is the theme, and it just, so once I had already sketched it out, I was like, I started to realize why I made the decisions, like at every single like loop or, bar. I was like, okay, I understand why I did that, and like, what was the motive in doing that. And that was like, then I cried again, because I was like, fuck, like this is like crazy, like this is insane, right? That like you're able to put this together. And yeah, long story short, I started to kind of like deconstruct it and realize that putting like a theme around it, or verbally saying what it was that I was trying to say. And yeah, there's a lot of other things that I kind of, initially planned to put out with it. Like I wanted to put out the live show right away, but I felt like that in and of itself should be a really like, it's a process of its own, and so I was actually supposed to debut the live show for it this March, which got postponed. But it was an incredible experience. Answer your question.
Yeah, it does sound like the experience itself like paid off, like in a way, like it wasn't necessarily about like what you're gonna get out of or after the album. It's more about the experience of writing the album. Was the experience, was the goal, or say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it always should be, because like, again, like you cannot look to music for any kind of validation, because you'll never get it. Because like you said, if you're actually seeking that in the first place, then it's like, that's already, you should just really take a break. And for me, it was like, this term of like, kind of inner demons, and like facing your demons, and like trying to like, trying to like overcome inner challenges, right? And for me, writing that was a huge like milestone for me personally.
sorry.
It's like it's like meditation. It's like meditative, right? Just like, you know, it was basically like one long meditation, I guess.
Such an interesting concept, like also because it's something that keeps coming back with other people, which is when you look for validation or like reaching an outcome, especially when doing music, eventually you don't get fulfilled by that. So like eventually it's like a glass that is always empty. You will always like struggle to get it empty again, and then you always get empty again. But when rather you enjoy the process, like you enjoy making music, or you get these cathartic moments where you feel like, wow, I was mind blown by writing the album. That's when you actually get attached to the music, and you get fulfillment on what you're doing.
Totally. I feel that way about DJs or just DJing too, in the sense that like I have a lot of, you know, friends who DJ, and they'll come up and they're excellent DJs. They're really good at their craft. And they'll come up to me and they'll say, you know, I started learning to produce, or I started producing more, and, you know, it's just really frustrating. Like, I'm just like super frustrated with it. I can't get myself to like, you know, commit, you know, more than an hour. And, you know, yeah, that's kind of part of the process, sure. But I always say, like, I'm like, why are you making music in the first place? Like, do you feel like you have to make music, you know, to DJ? Because if that's your motive, then, you know, that's not going to make you happy, you know? Like, for me, like, I'm obsessed with production. In many ways, I felt that way about DJing. Like, I didn't necessarily want to be doing this show. Like, okay, this is an extension, like, you know, and I've come to love, like, a lot of, like, performance aspects too, but, like, you know, I could sit in front of Logic for, like, 16 hours straight, you know, and I'm good. Like, I just, you know, like, I'll take, like, you know, like, a few breaks. But, you know, with DJing, it's like, it was definitely, like, more challenging for me, you know? So you're right, like, motive and intent.
So there's a lot of like to investigate about that. It's super interesting. One question that comes from someone in the audience, a guy named Sander Boyles. I don't know if it's a real name, but maybe you know him already. But he was asking something about your field recordings. He mentioned that there are many field recordings on your music in production, and he was asking, is there anything off bounds, or like something that you should not do or you should do? Let's say at their boundaries.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually met Sandra through Electric Deluxe and Store. It's an awesome guy. He they invited me last year to do a show, and I'm laughing because we always have this conversation of like field recordings, and like I record everything. It's like this. I mean, I'm not recording you right now. Don't worry.
I'm recording. So.
It's like you're recording me. Actually, tables have turned. Oddly enough, but there's just like these moments in life, right? That like will never happen again. Simply put. And when you have like the sonic portion of that, and you just capture it then and there, like it's just this like capsulated time that you will never have again. And I'm just so fascinated with it. And so I have like all types of recordings, and the whole album was field recording, like 99% of it, like even like most of the drums as well, percussive elements, like everything was like very like Frankenstein together. And yeah, just I have really like everything. Like I pulled up a project the other day from like 6 years ago, and I had like a sample of like my heartbeat because I had like a heart condition when I was younger. And I guess I had like sampled like while the doctor was doing my test, I guess I was like sitting there like sampling the heartbeat. And I was just like, how do I have, I mean, I have really real odd things like, you know, obviously there's like, you know, I'm not going to record something that makes somebody uncomfortable, but at the same time, there's also some situations that I've had that like were very uncomfortable for me personally. And I recorded it because as painful as it is, it was like, this is like incredible musically, you know? So, we've sampled a lot of like, voicemails and just like a lot of things. It's just very unique.
And it's interesting. And I think I lost my train of thought, but I was something. Yes, and it's an emotional anchor when you record something. It's like you taking a picture and then looking at the picture years after. And you remind yourself of the feelings you got when that thing happened in reality.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's insane. I had a lot of like on the album. I feel like I did all the like VHS stuff. Where I just went back and I rewatched videos of like my family when I was younger, and then like like I remember like my like longest like relationship too. Like I had like this like like, last few voicemails or, calls, whatever. And I had samples of it, and it was just like, it was so emotionally taxing, but at the same time, it was like, this is awesome. So sometimes, like, I'm in a situation, I'm like, this is a really awful situation. I'm like, but the sound is like incredible, so I have to sample this.
Wow. Yeah, it's very interesting. There's another question that to me sounds weird, but maybe you'll get the insider joke from Sander, which is, what do you think about goats?
Oh my God.
If it's too weird, we're gonna cut it out, but otherwise we'll
Yeah, I don't know. That's also like he's a really interesting person, and like we often talk about like the creative process, and goats has become like you could make this off the record, just like an inside joke. He probably thought that wasn't gonna make the cut, so he's like, I'll just throw it in there.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So that's good. We'll see. And on Dusk and Haze, question for someone in the audience, Mr. Pup, news on the label. Do you have anything planned? And I guess tied into that, one question that I had was, I saw a charity section on the website of your label, and I wanted to ask whether you have any plans, anything you want to announce now, or anything that you want to announce in the future.
So like, even with my own release schedule and the labels as well, I put everything on a standstill like once everything, the lockdown happened, because not to not do those things anymore. Just I wanted to like reformulate the schedule and make it more suitable to like the new timeline of what was going to happen for 2020. And so we have like a stack of releases lined up for the year. But like the timing of when everything comes out changed. And I'm very excited also because I found myself also like adding more, like finding a lot of tracks from like younger producers who, and yeah, they're like, some of them are like, like 18, 21, and it's like, it's amazing the stuff they're making. And what I liked about it is like, they're like very upbeat. They're really optimistic and like just energetic tracks. And so, we have really like exciting releases. And then the charity stuff, it's a really, it's a deep topic actually, because I thought like the idea of like charity was like, initially, when I formulated like the moving parts of Dusk and Haze, so it's like, okay, we do events, we like, for a label, and charity was this like idea that I really wanted to pursue and have it very like equated. But at the time, it was like very direct, right? It was like we did an event, for example, and like we donated all the funds to like this like a queer organization in New York, and it feels great to donate just on that level. But then I was like, I really want to change my approach to charity. So now like I'm working on this thing of like basically that is like starting at the root level, like starting with helping the issue from the root level versus like when it's already a problem.
Right.
So I've been thinking about basically like starting up this program to help producers, like young producers, like very young kids especially, giving them tools and resources to make music. Because I feel like, if as a kid myself, like when I had like a lot of like problems in what was happening in my life, music was an escape, right? And there's like no stronger weapon than giving a kid like logic. It's just the most amazing gift you can ever give somebody. Yeah.
It is amazing, and yes, I'm looking forward to knowing more when you're ready.
So I was thinking about, basically, sorry to cut you off, like basically like aligning with like software companies and like hardware companies, to see if they're, basically willing to give a few licenses or, basically support it from like a resource standpoint. And I'm still working on that, but I feel like that for me will feel more fulfilling than just donating money, which is great too. And I don't think it should stop there, but
Yeah, this might become off the records, but I'm smiling because we are actually in the process of doing a very similar thing. We have an accelerator program with HoS Sound where we normally take producers from ideation to releasing the track and promoting it. And now we're working with a guy in London who has worked with young kids in disadvantaged neighborhood to get access to music lessons. And now we are thinking to do a similar thing where we would provide the teachers and the online course, and work with a software company who would provide them Ableton. So I'll let you know offline. I'll send you a couple of information as soon as we have something shaped up, and maybe there's something we do together.
Yes, please. For me, it's like, I think that's super exciting what you just said. I'm really excited to see how that develops for you guys. And like at the end of the day, it's like, it's just an extension like of what I'm already doing, like however I can help you guys. You know what I mean? It's like, it's as long as it's constructive to the end result, for me is like, it's not really anything to do with me. And I think it was also like, we've also left this like coming soon landing page there, because it was like, do I really need to also like make this part of my identity that I'm doing this, or can I just like do this program as like an independent thing, or just like, so absolutely, however I could contribute to that, let me know.
Of course, yes. We are talking with a couple of software companies. I think next week we have a meeting with one of them. It's not Logic, but you might be
not Apple. Actually, yeah, I feel like they don't really have that much. I haven't seen like an artist, department. I guess like they do like Apple artists and like Apple Music, but like, I think other companies are a bit more keen on like there's like actually like that dedicated like teams around it. So
yeah, exactly. I'm sure we're gonna find someone, because it's a moment also where I think people feel more keen to help other people, because everybody's kind of empathizing with the general pain, I think. Yes. Okay, I'm thinking what other I wanted to ask you. Yes, so there was something that I think you mentioned before, which was this, the sense of validation, which, when you seek a sense of validation from the outside world, it's a dangerous thing, because it doesn't lead you to happiness long term. And I sometimes feel like social media are kind of pushing us too much in that direction, because it's the usual story, like, you chase short-term oxytocin or dopamine shots, and then you become addicted to these things, and then you change a bit the way you would do things, because you want to be liked, you want to receive attention. And is there anything that you think any person like we could do, like any normal person could do in the immediate term, to help protect themselves from this kind of negative or these pitfalls or negative thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like it's something that we've all like dismissed, like the Mental Health Association of Social Media. And I think that because I see a lot of people just breaking down, and like just deactivating things, reactivating it, and including myself at points where I was like, like there's this platform that we've all just started using that didn't exist before, and we're not thinking about the repercussions of it, right? We're just doing it. And then for artists, it's a whole other thing. It's like one step further, where it's now associated with your like self-worth, by basically validating your worth, or promoters validating worth through likes, right? So it's like, I think like, I always think that like education and like information is the most powerful way to combat anything, right? Like knowledge is power in every capacity. So I think that if you start like detaching the emotional side of it and looking at it as like a resource, looking at it as a tool, you can develop a healthier relationship. It's more functional. And so I think like this classic argument of like, social media is ruining music, I don't agree, because I think social media is also connecting a lot of people and it's giving a lot of opportunities, because it has, to me at least. So I think that like, and it's just part of part of life now. It's like you can't like really like flush it out. So yeah, I think just like start looking at it for more of a functional use, and that's your decision as an artist, if you want to have a profile that's more personal, or you just want to have it, purely music. And I don't think one is more interesting than the other. In fact, I think that we're going to hit like, we're just like in this maximalist kind of phase right now, and we're just going to max out, and then eventually things are just going to go back to simplicity, right? And go back to minimal culture. But yeah, it's bizarre, but it is definitely a powerful tool, and it's like, I think that I would never tell somebody that to not engage in it.
Yeah, it's, I mean, the only fact that we have in this conversation is probably also thanks to social media. So it is
exactly like complaining on social media about social media is right.
It's kind of
it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
Completely.
It's like if you're like, oh, this restaurant is shit, like they have shit food, and then you keep going there,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I read a bit of your interview with Attack Magazine, and they asked you and a couple of other artists about how do you see the music progressing in the next 10 years. And I think, I mean, your outlook in general, your vision of the music industry was very positive. You were very propositive. How much has that changed? Now
So
that,
funny because they asked that like right before lockdown.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
2020 is gonna be my year. Like I'm ready for it. And you know what? Actually, I think it really is. Really is, and it, the more you look at it as that, the better, the more it makes sense, because it's probably the best thing that could have happened to music, to be honest.
Yeah.
To have this time off. So I am still defending my like optimism, because while I saw it panning out differently in terms of like on a physical level, I think that on a deeper level, it was actually the most brilliant thing that could have happened. And that's why I think that my anxiety was setting in after 3 months, because I was like, it hasn't been enough time for us to really actually like reap the whole benefits of this time. Because if we have like 3 more months, like, and you're seeing DJs just like run back into DJing prematurely, I think, and it's like, there's so much more we can get out of this, and you're seeing it, like, Bandcamp started doing like their like, free Fridays, or like where they give like all the proceeds to artists, and there's a lot of change that's happening right now, and there's only gonna be better change if we just actually enjoy this time and we actually like accept it.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that it's very interesting. Like, aside from all the health issues that this thing clearly has caused, I think the reset of the industry, okay, let's say the health and economical problems and potentially social problems that are coming out of these two things, aside from all of this, I think mentally it was probably a good thing, like a good test for all of us, because in the fact that we kind of, as a world, it has united us in a lot of ways, because we were in the same boot camp all together, like eating the mud, like having to be like sucking the shit, and I think that is a really, good thing that happened in on the mess. So hopefully it's gonna go.
Yes.
So a couple of rapid fire questions. Actually, before that, I wanted to give credit to Attack Magazine, which no, Attack Magazine, old magazine. That's
But Attack too, because they're also awesome.
Attack 2, yes, of course.
Yeah, they're
love
also,
Attack 2, yeah. I love Attack 2, and they do a lot of work for producers as well. They have a lot of sample libraries, and they do interviews, and they do a really good job also in sampling artist releases, and they're very articulated in the way they explain.
Totally.
Yeah. And I wanted also to give credit to our second girlfriend of Alt Magazine, who interviewed you some time ago, and I think the style of questions that they have is very interesting, because it's very, very specific. They do the research before they send you the questions, and it makes you feel as an interviewee, I think it's much more interesting than just going on, hey, tell me what brought you to music. I don't know. It's very interesting. Yeah. If you recall the interview you did with them, like, was there any specific question that you were like, holy shit, like, I don't know how to answer this. It's challenging.
Yeah. It's always, yeah, to be honest, like I have really bad memory of like situations that I don't feel this like emotional attachment to, naturally, because either something is important to you or it's not, and that interview stood out for me, so it was like more memorable than than others, let's say. And one of the questions was like really off the rails, and like it was, but the most challenging, it was like, even though it was phrased, I guess it's like, if falling in love were one thing, what would it look like if it was something physical, visual? Mm-hmm. And it was the thing, I was like, damn, like, how do I answer this? How can I answer this? And I think my response was like Logic or something, and it was like Logic Pro X and 10, and then I like was thinking about that over and over, and I realized that like it's weird. I'm a bit of a hermit, so maybe like my perspective is different, but when I really think about like the purest form of love, or the purest form of like this like endless infinite thing, I really equate it to making music or any craft, like following a craft fully. Because when I think about making music and like just how much, like how much value it has for me, it's like it's infinite, it's always evolving, it's always there. It's the one thing that I feel like it's basically the purest form of love, I think, you know. And like the really the purest, and not to sound like, you know, on a, like a cliche cheesy level or anything, it really is. It's like, you know, it's just everlasting, and it's always the thing that I feel like my first intuition is like, I come home from a party, I'm like, I just want to make music, you know. I'm at a party, I'm like, actually just want to be home making music, you know. Or like I always there, and that kind of like natural like desire of just like, that's love, you know. And then like your motive, because I always think about like, okay, you know, if you're in your peak happiness, and like what's the thing you want to share that with, or what's the thing you want to be doing, and if it's music, then I'm like, okay, then I think my motive is in the right place, you know. And I think that that's when I realized that it was like, okay, it's making music. So yeah, that was a really cool question.
It's a yeah, and also especially I guess like I really connect a lot with what you said, and I think it sounds like your music in your way, in your case, is like connected with your real self and your sense of purpose. So when you do music, when you think about music, it kind of makes you feel aligned with like, it's me, no bullshit. And so a couple of rapid fire questions. What is your secret weapon? And it can be something outside of music, anything in your life that you feel is your secret weapon.
My secret weapon, it's probably the thing that's my biggest weakness too, is probably my biggest weapon, is like commitment to ideas, you know. But at the same time, like that has become my strength in many ways, because it has allowed me to be more diverse, you know. Yeah. But it was definitely like a weakness for a really long time, and I think that it's become my biggest weapon, because I can just like, even in a range of like production stylistically, like I can confidently say now, I think after let's say a decade of making music, that I can pretty much sit down and make any style, you know. And that was really hard in the beginning, but to like identify with that. But and the same with situations, like I have like the most like dynamic group of friends, you know, like it's like from all jobs, you know, people who are interested in all different things. And that's hard when you're younger, because you know your group of friends are everywhere and they're all over the world, they all like different things, and you're like, you don't have one steady group of friends. But then you realize that that's actually like the most amazing thing later, you know. So I think that, yeah, just like embracing your weaknesses, because they can very much become your biggest weapons.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful thing. And I guess the commitment part is also because you worked so much on it and you developed it. You turned that weakness into a skill because you worked so much. That became, you mastered it. Yeah. And so guilty pleasures. What is that one track that is a guilty pleasure of yours? Guilty pleasure of yours?
I don't know if it's really guilty. Like I don't feel that way about tracks, you know. Like it's strange. I don't have a guilty pleasure, because I don't feel guilty about liking things, right? Like it's but something that I think I would feel like, you know, kind of like it would be testing the waters to play. I guess like I've always wanted to do like this, like I've always wanted to have like this kind of like very peak, like kind of like folk music, like using folk music in a set, you know, really like on a very bizarre level, that just makes people really uncomfortable. And there's so much incredible like tribal music and even like Georgian folk music that's just incredible, but it can make audiences really feel awkward. And I like that, you know, because I like the idea of like questioning crowds. Yeah. Like it's not, because it's not about me anymore, right? It's just about the idea. And yeah, it's so easy in a techno set, you know, because you're just delivering like a consistent thing. And I love when you just break out of that and you make people feel really weird for a second, you know.
it makes it super interesting. Even if I find it like, even when you not necessarily like what you're hearing, like that kind of opens up your mind. That you're like, okay, you know.
Yeah. I remember I walked in once, like I love Regis. Like I would say he's been a huge inspiration for my, like, on a creative level and technical too. Like his use of like delays on drums, like that was like a massive breakthrough for me when I was like, you know, kind of learning to produce. And I remember I like walked into like some party that Carl was playing, and like, and he has a habit of doing that. He'll like have these like weird moments that are just like so odd, especially if you're just walking into the party. And yeah, like he was, you know, I walked in and he just played like the Nick Cave's like old, they just had this old like punk band birthday party. Maybe probably you know about it. And the lyrics like, you know, who wants to die, and just like pause, you know, and then just drops into this like, and it was the first thing I walked into, and I was just like, that was so sick. You know, just like, this is so awesome. And those kind of moments, I think, like, because those have challenged me, so obviously it would challenge other crowds. I think, you know, just using strange samples.
Yes, and especially when it's paired up with skills that are like, it makes it like almost like flawless. Like it builds up in the speech that the person is like communicating. Very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so last question, which is the tradition of HoS Sound, is what question would you like us to ask our next guest?
Okay, let's make it really very hard and awkward. I think, but again, probably the thing that they'll walk away from and really think about. I always thought this idea of asking people just how are you is very generic, and it should actually be the last thing that they should ask in a conversation instead of the first thing, because it's very overlooked. And, you know, you ask somebody how are you, everybody just says good, but how are you really? You know, how are you really doing? And like asking that at the end of the interview, I think, and just seeing the reaction of how people and they walk away thinking about that. It's the last thing, but the most important thing, I think.
Amazing. I look forward to asking that question.
Kind of odd, right? Just don't ask at the start. Just like, oh, this guy was so rude. He didn't ask how I was doing.
Especially like if the person happens to be British. I mean, I think it's like, you know, like whatever, say hi without how are you next to it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, etiquette is a weird thing. Like it's just like it's not, it doesn't align with psychology at all. Sometimes like it's like you're not gonna you're not gonna tell somebody how you really feel. That's the first thing of the conversation, you know. But once you've opened up to them, you'll be a lot more trusting of actually saying the truth.
Yeah, you feel like, you know, it's not gonna eat you alive or like make fun of you or walk away if you say I'm shit. No.
yeah, because like, you know, like at the start of this call, I might have been like, you know, I'm good. How are you? Right. And then, but then I was like, you know what? This has been a really nice conversation. I feel nice and relaxed. I can be like, you know, I actually had a really, really like awful night, you know, or like, you know, you started off, you know, expressing like, you know, I had this issue with my neighbors, whatever, but a lot of people don't feel that same comfort.
No, I think that's a very interesting point, because I find it like, yes, there are people who are a bit more maybe outspoken or comfortable in sharing this stuff. And I find that when they do that, even at the start of the conversation, like, oh, I'm shit, you know, I don't know, whatever, like I just got run over by a car or something, that puts the other person more like comfortable, and you feel like, okay, it's like, okay, we are, you know, it's person to person. We're not trying to hide anything. There's nothing to hide from.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, it's just creating those situations, right, for a person to even feel comfortable enough and safe enough to say that. And yeah, you do that through building communication, not like throwing it on somebody right away, because that makes you scared.
Yeah, very true. And as you might imagine, there's a question from our previous guest. It's easy. So, which is one, what is the album that people don't know about, that you think people don't know about, but they should really listen to outside of electronic music?
Well, I love a lot of film scores, and I would say like two answers. One, a very popular example is just because I started like remixing it yesterday, and I was like, oh, I'm surprised that some people haven't listened to it. It's the soundtrack for Eyes Wide Shut. It's an insane soundtrack, and I think like I would suggest listening to it twice, because the first time you don't really grasp how deep it is. And second, the soundtrack for Babel. Gustavo Santaolalla did that, and he's an incredible film score producer, and
Bubble.
that is, yeah, I would say that one is more on the lines of it infuses a lot of folk elements, but both deeply touching. I would definitely suggest people to listen to it.
Nice. And was there a third one you were about to mention? Third one, or
Babel?
Yeah,
that was the second one. Yeah, Babel by Gustavo Santaolalla. Yeah.
Nice. Great. I just made some notes of that, and then I'm gonna put them in the show notes. Any latest projects that you would like people to check out if they're interested in knowing more about you, Dusk and Haze, anything you want to point their attention to?
Let's see. I would say my releases this year, just the full release schedule. Maybe it's a gluttonous answer, but because it's a lot more pointed, targeted, and thought out than I've had the time to do before. Everything else was just all right, well, I guess this is being released, and I think just following the progression of it over the next few months is something I'm proud of. So
yes. Nice. Okay, perfect.
And equally the Dusk and Haze stuff too, because I treat it like my own releases. I'm as emotionally invested into it as if it were my own.
Yeah. Of course, amazing. And if there is anything specifically when you have links that when you have an album or an EP or whatever release you wanna point out, if you send it to us, we share it with our community. It would be a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sophia, this has been a great pleasure to meet you.
You too.
Very nice to speak with you. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you for taking the time.
Okay, guys, this is Joseph, and this is the outro. If you really like the content, I wanted to ask you, please consider liking us on Instagram or leaving a review on the podcast. Whether you're using that on Apple is very useful for us, and your comment makes all of our work worth it. Also, if you have any guests that you really would like us to chat with, let us know. We take any suggestion or any feedback, and we use it to improve and direct what we're gonna do next. If you're a producer and you're interested in masterclasses with artists such as Scalameria, VSK, Romek, Lag, and many more, you can now check our website homosound.co.uk. We have plenty of classes and more are coming as well. So brace yourself, you're gonna get a lot of content. And one last thing, shout out for Vlad for editing this podcast and Declan for creating the content that you all see on social media. Plus, of course, big thanks to Juliana, Flaminia, Alessandro and Rick from TapeFeed for all the rest of the work at HoS Sound. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time at HoS Sound.